Mr. Speaker, after Donald Trump and his co-president Elon Musk took office on January 20th, Democrats in Congress realized that we were engaged in a multifaceted struggle to protect and defend everyday Americans from the harm being inflicted by this reckless and cruel administration. It was an all-hands-on-deck moment with roles for Congress, the courts, and for we, the people. So on February 10th, House Democratic Party Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries formally established the Rapid Response Task Force and Litigation Working Group, chaired by Assistant Leader Joe Neguse and co-chaired by Representatives Rosa DeLauro, Jerry Connolly, and Jamie Raskin. The task force itself is also a multifaceted defense of our democracy, with its 45 members participating in various working groups. I participate in the litigation working group that brainstorms ideas for amicus briefs where Congress's perspective would be especially important and useful to the courts, such as when the Trump administration tramples upon Congress's constitutional powers by ignoring the will of Congress as expressed by legislation that directs that a certain thing be done. When Congress passes legislation and that legislation is signed into law, then whoever is president is charged with the responsibility of taking care that that law is faithfully executed. The president does not have the power to nullify a law passed by Congress, but this president is willfully acting like a dictator. And the litigation working group is working to stop this president from acting unlawfully and unconstitutionally. And we are seeing great success in the courts, which is why this president is now attacking the judiciary and attacking judges. And we'll talk about that later during this special order hour, which I've been asked to lead. I also participate in a hearings working group that sets up hearings across the nation to highlight how this administration's unlawful and unconstitutional actions are affecting everyday people. And importantly, for tonight, I participate in the Special Order Hour Working Group, where my fellow representatives and I organize time to speak on topics of urgent importance so that the American public can be informed about the harm this administration is causing, our thoughts about it, and what we can do about it, both here in the halls of Congress and in the courts, as well as in the streets. Tonight, the topic I feel most urgency around is illuminating the ways that the Trump administration is destroying democracy through its attack on the rule of law. As a young man, I decided to become a lawyer. Actually, as a child, I was 4 years old when my hero, my mentor, my cousin, we called him Toki, his name was Archibald Hill. I was 4 years old when he graduated from law school and became a lawyer. And when that happened, I decided at that tender age of 4 years old, I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to be an attorney also. And Archibald went out to Oklahoma and set up his home base there, Oklahoma City, and he hung out his shingle as a solo practitioner and began to practice criminal defense law. And me, being his acolyte, his fan, I wanted to be just like him, and I decided I was going to open up my law firm and practice criminal defense law just like him. And I believed in due process. I believed that if government accused you of a crime, you had a right to a trial by a jury of your peers and the prosecutor had the burden of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt before the jury was authorized to convict. The government could not just accuse you of something without evidence, lock you up, and throw away the key without due process. I believe in the rule of law, and I believe in the Constitution, which undergirds the rule of law, and I believe in equal protection under the law. And as a lawyer, I fought for my clients in court, ensuring they received due process and equal protection under the law that they were entitled to. And I administered our system of justice as a magistrate court judge, upholding the law without fear or favor. That's the America that I love, one where everyone in this country feels secure enough in our rights to speak their mind and to live freely. And I'm deeply disturbed about the devolution that I'm seeing taking place right now in terms of the rule of law and justice in this country. Unfortunately, this is what we are seeing under this Trump reign of terror. In only 100 days, there has been an onslaught of attacks on the judiciary and the rule of law. The Department of Justice, Trump is using the Department of Justice to carry out a campaign of terror, retribution, and vengeance. Trump is perverting his Justice Department away from administering justice into an outfit that is only there to prosecute his personal vendettas, punish his enemies, and reward his friends. He has installed, to do his bidding, Banana Republic cronies like Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel, who are more than willing to carry out Trump's abuse of the justice system. Under their reign, dozens of prosecutors were targeted, identified, and fired simply because they had worked on the January 6th insurrection cases. I lost my part here. The FBI turned over a list of 4,000 current and former FBI personnel who worked on the January 6 cases so that they too could be targeted for firing. When the pardon attorney refused to recommend restoring the gun rights of one of President Trump's supporters, who was also a convicted domestic violence perpetrator, guess what? She was fired too. And when she was called to testify as a whistleblower about her termination, she was called by Democrats to Congress. Then the Friday night before the Monday she was to show up in Congress, armed law enforcement agents were directed to show up at her house on a Friday night, late, knocking on her door, and they tried to intimidate her out of testifying. It didn't work, I'm happy to report. The DOJ is also opening investigations to intimidate other whistleblowers from speaking up and to punish those who already have. The Department of Justice has opened investigations into a lawyer who previously prosecuted Trump's friends. They're investigating a governor who opposed Trump. They're investigating the New York Attorney General, the New Jersey Attorney General, and also United States representatives and senators who have spoken out against the Trump administration. Trump has directed the Department of Justice to investigate Chris Krebs because Chris Krebs told the truth that the 2020 election was safe and secure. And just within the last week, the Attorney General issued legal guidelines that allow the Justice Department to subpoena reporters' personal communications without notice and to criminally prosecute any government employees who are seen as undermining the administration's views. The message is clear. If you say anything negative about the king, then you are not safe. This reign of terror is what we're talking about tonight, and I'm glad to be joined by my colleague from the great state of New Mexico, Representative Melanie Stansbury, and she is now recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to say thank you to my colleague for convening this special order hour. Mr. Speaker, this week marks this administration's first 100 days in office. It's been 100 days of chaos, corruption, confusion, and absolute destruction of our Constitution and the norms that this great nation was built on. 100 days of tearing apart our democracy, our families, our communities, the vital federal programs that serve the people who make up our communities, thousands fired, agencies dismantled, your personal and private data stolen, self-dealing billions of dollars in federal contracts, judges jailed, a Congress that refuses to act and to do its job, and to countless Americans who are living in fear. Mr. Speaker, I've just wrapped up a town hall tour across my district, while my colleagues across the aisle are afraid to even face their constituents. We are showing up every day across our communities. 15 town halls touching 15,000 New Mexicans across every county that we represent in 12 towns and communities and tribal communities across our states. And let me say this, our people are afraid. Everywhere we go, across the aisle, people who are afraid they're going to lose their Social Security, people who are afraid they're going to lose the health care that keeps them and their family members alive. People who are afraid that they're not going to be able to afford to put a roof over their head or food on the table. People who are afraid watching as their family members and friends are facing the threats of deportation. Students who are afraid to show up to school because they don't know what will happen to themselves or their families. This is the sign of an unhealthy democracy. This is the sign of an executive that has lost touch with the American people. This is the sign of an authoritarian and autocratic way of operating. This is the sign of a democracy that has lost its way. This is a sign that the American people need to continue to stand up, to speak out, to show up, to attend those town halls, to call their representatives, to continue marching, to continue making sure that we hold our elected officials to account. All across my district, there is not a single family who has not been touched over the last 100 days. People who've lost their jobs, teachers and firefighters, people who work for the VA and the Forest Service, who work for our national security programs, scientists and engineers, people who just started their jobs, and people who've been there for countless decades. These are real stories, real people, real lives that have been impacted every single day for the last 100 days. And what have my colleagues across the aisle done? Nothing. They have done nothing. They have failed to do their most basic constitutional duty of speaking up on behalf of the people that they represent, of holding the administration accountable, of saying something when they see something that is wrong. And not only that, do they refuse to do their most basic jobs. They are here in this building working on a tax package behind the closed doors all around us that will further take away the rights of the American people, that will decimate basic programs that help people put food on the table and a roof over their heads. All around us, our colleagues are refusing to say out loud the things they will say to us in private, that they too are frightened about what is happening, that they too have constituents and veterans and elderly people on Social Security and disability who are frightened for their lives right now. What is happening in this country is not normal. We refuse to normalize it. We refuse to allow our democracy to be hijacked. We refuse to allow the silence that is deafening this country right now to continue. We must continue to speak up. And so I say, Mr. Speaker, the time to act is now, because if we do not, we will lose everything. We must restore accountability. We must restore our institutions. We must restore our norms. We must stand up. We must speak out. And we need our colleagues across the aisle to join us before we lose our democracy. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you for those very thoughtful comments, and the terror that inflicts my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, so that if they find it impossible to muster the courage to speak out when they see something wrong and hear something wrong, and you know, everything going against their morals. They know it's wrong, but yet they can't speak out. They are victims of this reign of terror, although I don't absolve them of responsibility for having no courage. They should have courage, just like the law firms that have been targeted by the Trump administration. Those law firms, some of whom have protested, but others have yielded to the terror. He's threatening these very powerful and wealthy corporations or corporate representing law firms with investigations, with revocation of security clearances, with termination of government contracts or funding, with bans from accessing government buildings, and hiring bans. Some of these law firms are standing up and suing the Trump administration for this unlawful behavior. Law firms like Perkins Coie, Jenner & Block, Sussman Godfrey, and Wilmer Hale, but a raft of other law firms like Paul Weiss, Skadden, and Latham bent the knee and laid down because they were too afraid of this administration destroying their businesses. I mean, here are a number of big, bad, powerful, wealthy law firms that can't even use the law to protect themselves, afraid to use the law to protect themselves. What makes their clients think that those law firms that bent a knee to Trump will represent their interest? I don't know. Only time will tell what happens to those firms that capitulated. But in the first Trump administration, law firms were part of the huge effort by the legal community to challenge unconstitutional policies of the Trump administration, like the Muslim ban. But this time around, the Trump administration is going to make sure that that doesn't happen. That's why they're threatening these law firms and making them heel and forcing them to come to the table and capitulate and roll over and let him wipe let him rub their soft bellies. They won't be involved in protecting the people against Trump's excesses this time around. Not only that, but as part of their deal with Trump, these law firms promised nearly $1 billion in pro bono work, but only for the causes that Trump cares about. Now, pro bono means for the public good, but apparently Trump and the law firms that he has punked out think it just means free legal work for Trump. Trump has punked these big, powerful, and wealthy law firms into providing free labor to help him negotiate trade deals, to help him revive the coal industry, and to help his friend Elon Musk, the billionaire, as he wields a chainsaw through his position as head of the Department of Government Efficiency. White House officials have said the pro bono work could be used towards representing Trump himself or his allies. And just last night, one of Trump's executive orders directed the Attorney General to use this private sector pro bono work that he has extracted to represent him so that they would defend law enforcement officers who are charged with offenses in the performance of their official duties. So let me translate that. That means, okay, you remember George Floyd, who was murdered by an officer who wouldn't take his knee off of George Floyd's neck until he suffocated? Y'all remember that? Y'all remember Breonna Taylor, who was shot and killed in her bed after a botched, no-knock drug raid? Or Tyree Nichols, who was beaten to death after a traffic stop? Under the new Trump regime, the DOJ would conscript private law firms to, for free, represent those police officers against the families of the victims of police brutality. That's not the way that the Department of Justice should work. And that's not the way that law firms, big, powerful law firms, should work. They should choose the clients that they want to represent, not Donald Trump choosing their clients and causes for them. And now I'm pleased to yield some time to my good friend, Representative Dan Goldman from New York, a former prosecutor, and he's got some things that he wants to tell you. I'm going to yield to this gentleman 10 minutes.
Thank you very much to my colleague, Mr. Johnson, for organizing this incredibly important special order hour to highlight the absolutely unprecedented and devastating attacks on our democracy and on the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to sound the alarm that our democratic values and the rule of law are under attack. We all must open our eyes before we find ourselves in Vladimir Putin's Russia. In just 100 days, President Trump has engaged in a coordinated, premeditated, deliberate attempt to dismantle our government. Let's be very clear. Donald Trump does not seek to lead us. He seeks to rule us. And we all must open our eyes. Since he first came into office, President Trump has persistently attacked the media to undermine the credibility of the messenger of news that he didn't like. And then, during the special counsel Mueller's investigation on Russia's interference in the 2016 election to benefit Donald Trump's campaign, President Trump attacked the FBI relentlessly, trying to undermine its credibility. Rather than debate the facts or the evidence, which he knows he would lose, isn't it just a lot easier to simply shoot the messenger and claim that everything bad about you is just fake news? Now, while many have correctly been focusing on the arbitrary and devastating cuts to essential federal programs, or the disastrous and reckless tariffs that have increased prices and inflation and have tanked the economy, President Trump's first 100 days have also escalated this relentless assault on the checks and balances that have been the foundation of our great nation. On day one, he pardoned more than 1,500 convicted criminals who stormed this very building on January 6th. Hundreds of them were convicted for violently assaulting law enforcement officers. Blatant and disgusting disregard for the rule of law and for our fine men and women in uniform. Next, during his first week, he fired nearly 20 inspectors general, the independent watchdogs in the executive branch agencies whose responsibility is to ensure that those agencies follow the law. Then he went after the Department of Justice and the FBI, firing prosecutors and special agents who investigated his criminal conduct, who simply did their job, before turning to the public integrity section, the renowned, venerable institution that was created after Watergate to be an independent investigative body of public officials. He and his administration have also been firing and forcing out anyone who might not share his political views, even though these jobs are career, nonpartisan, apolitical jobs. Next, he went after lawyers and law firms who have tried to hold him accountable to the law, and he continues to do so. He has signed several executive orders trying to limit the ability of law firms to represent their clients, one of the fundamental hallmarks of our system of laws. He's gone after universities, institutions that form the bedrock foundation of the growth and innovation of our great country, and that underpin and form the foundation for the best global economy in the world, threatening now to withhold billions of dollars in federal funding unless universities change their curriculum, change their admissions process, change their hiring process, and change other core parts of their mission that they decide as educational institutions in this democracy. He's also waging a war against nonprofit organizations, yanking grants away that have already been made and allocated, and threatening to remove the tax-exempt status of any organization that may disagree with his opinions or support lawsuits that might actually enforce existing laws. You see where this is going? The media, the FBI, inspectors general, the Department of Justice, law firms, universities, nonprofit organizations, all institutions that enforce our laws, that hold those in power accountable. This is his methodical way of undermining all forms of accountability in this government. But more recently, his attack on this Constitution has escalated. Now, of course, before he even came into office in January, President Trump had completely submitted the Republican conference of this body. They have abdicated their constitutional duty to be a check and balance on the executive branch. But the judiciary, the third branch of government, still remains in his way. So how does he deal with the judiciary? Well, he is openly and brazenly criticizing and attacking judicial rulings that he doesn't like, including a number issued by Republican-appointed judges, including his own. And now he is openly defying court orders, including Supreme Court orders. He, President, and some of my Republican colleagues are threatening judges, trying to bully them into ruling in their favor, not ruling based on their interpretation of the law. And now, with the career folks removed from our executive branch agencies, he has put in political lackeys to be in charge of our criminal justice system, our national security apparatus. And he is ordering investigations, criminal investigations, into individuals simply because they disagreed with him. That is the type of corruption that our country travels the world to root out, because it is at bottom as anti-democratic as it gets. It is the stuff of dictators and strongmen, not of democracies. And even worse now, he is attacking our basic and fundamental rights of due process. The right to have any allegation presented before a neutral arbiter who makes a final decision. Like a king, Donald Trump thinks it's okay for him to get to decide what the law is. But that is not how our system works. The Supreme Court and our judiciary decide what the law is. So when they do that, a unanimous Supreme Court ruled that he is not a king and that he must abide by our basic principles of due process. He then refuses. Admitting a mistake, Kilmar Abrego Garcia deported to El Salvador, even though he had an order on him that would prohibit him from going to El Salvador. Admits the mistake and refuses to bring him back to face due process. Due process is the cornerstone of our country. It distinguishes us from an authoritarian dictatorship, and Donald Trump wants to destroy it. But it's not optional, and court rulings are not simply suggestions. They are the backbone of American democracy, our final safeguard against the unchecked power of the executive. When a president ignores the courts, he is not challenging policy. He is declaring war on the Constitution itself. And yet, despite this laundry list of attacks on trying to undermine our democracy, our rule of law, my Republican colleagues remain absolutely silent, in some cases, even supportive. These alarm bells are deafening, but too many in this chamber would rather enable Donald Trump's descent into dictatorship than to confront him. They have laid down the power of the purse, and now they are actively trying to forfeit their oversight authority. They are silent as President Trump wages an all-out assault on our constitutional democracy. They are silent as he goes after the media, launches investigations into his political adversaries, attacks our basic fundamental rights. This is what dictators like Vladimir Putin do. They use repression, retaliation, and the threat of violence to consolidate their own power, while doling out billions of dollars to other oligarchs who will support them. Many countries have faced moments like this before, moments where the freedom and the openness of the democracy that they represent stand at a crossroads. I urge my Republican colleagues, please stand up for our Constitution, stand up for our democracy. None of us want authoritarianism. We don't want a dictator. But now is the time when the rubber hits the road and you will make your record for history. Do you want a dictator or do you want a democracy? I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his very prescient comments. And he spoke of a reign of terror that has been inflicted upon our institutions and the people of this country. And I never thought as a lawyer that I would ever live to see the Department of Justice being perverted to the point of turning its attention on persecuting a judge, a state court judge, for interfering, they say, with a deportation in her courtroom, in her courthouse. Even judges and courthouses in this nation are not safe from the reign of terror of this president. In Milwaukee, a state court judge, Judge Dugan, was arrested by the FBI for obstructing justice by allegedly directing a migrant out of her courtroom through a side door as federal agents waited to arrest him in the hallway. He was there for a hearing on charges unrelated to his immigration status. And Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, did not even have a judicial warrant to arrest him. A judicial warrant is based on probable cause and is signed by a judge and has the force of law. What the ICE agent had was only an administrative warrant, one which is just simply a piece of paper that somebody typed up saying that this person should be arrested. No probable cause, no nothing, just an administrative warrant. And so the judge told the ICE agents that if they wanted to arrest someone in her courtroom, they needed a judicial warrant, one signed by a judge, and they needed to speak with the chief judge of Milwaukee County. And the chief judge told the agents that they could not make arrests inside courtrooms or other private locations in the courthouse. And that makes a lot of sense if people know they will be picked up by ICE. If they report to the courthouse, they will never show up for their state court proceedings. And you're impugning the ability of the courts of the states to administer justice according to state law. So Judge Dugan is alleged to have ushered the migrant out a side door. A week later, FBI agents show up at her courthouse at the parking lot when she pulls up, and then they pull up on her, take her out of the car, put her in handcuffs, and perp walk her in a public manner that was meant to send a message to any other judge who stood up for the rule of law. This was clearly designed to make not just state court judges, but all judges, including federal judges, afraid of taking a position out of step with the Trump administration. It's meant to stop judges from doing their jobs and standing up for the communities that they are empowered by and against the illegal abuses of the Trump administration. And this is even before the talk Trump has stirred up about impeaching federal judges who have the temerity to rule against his administration when it violates the laws and the Constitution. So once again, Trump and his cronies are trying to bully and remove people who have the backbone to do their jobs and stand up for democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, I am now joined by my colleague from the great state of Georgia, Representative Lucy McBath. And before I yield to her, I would ask how much time is left?
The gentleman has 21 minutes remaining.
Okay. With that, I will yield to the gentlelady from Georgia 10 minutes.
Well, thank you so much to my colleague, my delegation colleague, Representative Johnson. Thank you for being the managing member and yielding your time to me this evening. And I'd like to thank you for yielding to me, and thank you for these moments tonight as we're in very critical times, as you have been expressing before I've come. I want to thank your staff as well for taking the time and effort to put this together tonight, and the litigation task force for convening this time on the floor tonight. I am proud to join my Democratic colleagues here to raise the alarm that this administration's actions are rapidly undermining our democracy and our justice system. However, Democrats continue to stand as the party of truth, the party of democracy, and the party of the American people. While the Trump administration is emboldened to tear down foundational programs that keep Americans safe and gut the Department of Justice and our law enforcement, Democrats in Congress are holding this administration accountable and fighting so that our government works for every family, not just the richest in the world or the close friends and colleagues of the president. And I'm here today not just as a public servant, but as a mother who knows what it feels like to lose everything to gun violence. And I know this: every family in America deserves the right to be safe at school, at the grocery store, and at home. But the Trump administration is making this much harder. This White House has worked to unwind the very protections that are designed to keep us safe. They have cut critical funding for gun violence prevention programs at the Department of Justice and have weakened the ATF, making it easier for guns to fall into the wrong hands and for gun crimes to go unsolved. They even disbanded key initiatives that tracked domestic terrorism and hate crimes tied to gun violence. These decisions are not just reckless, they are deadly, making it easier for violence to spread, for lives to be shattered, and for communities to keep on living in fear. As a mother who lost her son to gun violence, let me be perfectly clear. The American people are crying out for the basic right to live safe from unnecessary gun violence. Americans want to send their children to school or to the mall without wondering if they'll ever come home. These egregious Trump administration cuts are a slap in the face to every family and every survivor of gun violence. And in many cases, these rollbacks also make it more difficult for law enforcement to keep our communities safe. Unfortunately, of all the disputes local officers are called to address, domestic violence incidents involving a gun are some of the most dangerous. The emotion and volatility during these incidents mean that they can quickly turn deadly if a lethal weapon is present. Instead of strengthening background checks and red flag laws to provide tools to our law enforcement, the Trump administration has weakened those crisis response tools that law enforcement depends on and drastically cut funding to police departments, putting our officers at risk. I came to Congress to make our laws safer after I witnessed firsthand how fragile our justice system can be. And now I am determined, as we all should be determined, that we should be determined to protect our justice systems so that perpetrators of crime and violence are actually held accountable. Recent attacks on judges, as it has been expressed by my colleague, Mr. Johnson, these attacks on our judges and the courts by the Trump administration, they should alarm every American. It will now become harder for families to seek accountability for crimes that are committed against them, and for survivors to get the justice that they duly deserve. Every American, no matter their background or the state that they live in, deserves to trust that when they walk into a courtroom, that the law is fighting on their side. But when our elected leaders belittle public-serving judges and bend the Department of Justice to serve their own interests, they shatter that trust. Families looking for answers, for protection, and for justice cannot afford to wait. Trust me, I know. I have been one of those families. I know the stakes of receiving justice for a loved one, and they are just far too high. I thank my colleagues for standing up. I thank Representative Johnson for standing up for the integrity of our democracy on behalf of those who rely upon it every single day. And for those who are watching at home, I say this to you. You are simply not alone. House Democrats, we are fighting for you. And we will not let this administration undermine the very ideals of America and the fabric of our democracy. And I yield back.
I thank the gentle lady for her passion and for her courage and for her tenacity in representing the interests of those who have been adversely impacted by crime and who need the justice system to hold accountable those who would violate our laws. And she stands for justice for all, and I appreciate her comments. And, it's not just big law firms and judges that are being targeted. DOJ officials, FBI officials, government employees, whistleblowers. The Department of Justice is now going after none other than Act Blue. What is Act Blue? Trump has asked the DOJ to cut off funding to anyone who opposes him. And recently, he directed DOJ, the Department of Justice, to target Act Blue. What is Act Blue? It's a Democratic fundraising site which collects small dollar donations from people across the country, which fuel the Democratic Party's fundraising. Act Blue is a vehicle for everyday Americans to make small dollar donations to the campaigns of people who are standing up to Donald Trump and fighting back against this administration. And so, as a result of that, Donald Trump and his Department of so-called Justice is trying to shut them down. There's zero evidence of any wrongdoing by Act Blue, unlike this president's own shady crypto businesses and his taking of unconstitutional emoluments during his first term. But because Act Blue provides a way or a mechanism for small donors to fund those who oppose Trump, Trump is using his power over the DOJ to shut down Act Blue, like the authoritarian dictator that he's trying to be. Under rulings by the Supreme Court, it's big dark money donors who now dominate elections, and they donate heavily in favor of Republicans. And instead of making those dark money donors, putting some restrictions on them, he wants to make them the only ones who are in place to be able to fund elections of representatives. So in other words, he's persecuting and prosecuting, trying to prosecute a small dollar donor network for Democrats so that only the big dark money donors who participate in electing him and his MAGA cronies, they're the only ones who are playing the game. Now, we cannot allow that to stand. Trump is actually going full MAGA out here with this. And his purpose is to make America great again, wants to turn the country back to the time when the only people who had the right to vote were the white male property owners. And in line with that, he's trying to destroy the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. Under Trump, Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice is degrading the ability of civil rights lawyers to do their jobs on behalf of the American people. The Department of Justice has a storied Civil Rights Division, which was established by the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which focused on fighting racial discrimination. The division has since been tasked with upholding the rights of all persons in the United States, particularly the most vulnerable. When Trump took office, there were almost 400 attorneys in the division, and based on unofficial estimates, approximately 70% of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division is expected to accept the second resignation offer, leaving fewer than 150 attorneys, as Trump has twisted the division into something unrecognizable, into a unit that is bent on dismantling diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, reversing policies on transgender rights, rooting out so-called woke ideology, and other such nefarious goals. As Vanita Gupta, former Associate Attorney General under President Biden, has said, the division has been turned on its head and now is being used as a weapon against the very communities it was established to protect. Cases have been halted, and top managers from the voting rights section have been reassigned. As devastating as this is, it also means that knowledge is being lost. And if we have an election in 2028, it's not guaranteed with this president already selling merchandise proclaiming Trump 2028. But if we do have an election in 2028 and get a new president, we cannot snap our fingers instantly and rebuild an entire division that was just demolished by this administration. And so major damage is being done to our institutions. And all my brothers and sisters can do on the other side of the aisle is cower in favor of what they know is wrong and unjust. This is abuse of authority, and we cannot let it go unchecked. As much as Trump and his Department of Justice try to silence us, we must all speak up and speak out. Democracy is a fragile and precious thing. It lasts so long as we fight for it, because each time we let ourselves be cowed and each time we yield to fear, our rights narrow. I have before me the preamble of the Constitution. It says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice. It's right up there at the top. This is why we wanted to form a more perfect union, was to establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, and promote the general welfare. But it was to establish justice that premised everything else. And justice and the system of justice in this country is worth protecting. And we shall do so. We shall continue to do so. I promise that I will be in the trenches fighting with you, we the people. As John Lewis used to say, let's go make some good trouble. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Members are reminded to refrain from